Hi, I'm Jordan Moss, poet, writer, based in Rochester, New York.
Hi, I'm Taylor Solano. I am a journalist, a writer, and a reading teacher based in Rochester, New York.
And I'm going to start by reading a couple of poems here for my next book that I've been working on called Lush. So these are a couple of poems that are going to be featured in it. The first poem is called I Am a Mere Mortal. Adopted by the bottle at such an early age, aged inside it, lost so much, caring only for the cork, placing it upon my back, climbing up the steps, slipping, falling. I am an orphan of truth. I am left living, but not sure what's left. The bottle was unkind and stripped me like bleach. My hands shake for reality, same way a cop shakes his flashlight in your face. An ex-barfly and a bar. Another night in 100 nights. No grand suite playing or crystal chandelier shifting, stale air coveting its prey. Same eyes as last week, no splash of new ideas or anything. Same. Like hymns well traversed. Heads bow before altar. Nothing altered or reformed. Hands covering eyes and mouth, uneasy at becoming fixtures. Another night, so easily disassembled, with brilliant eyes. To best one's beatings, one must bear the brunt of moments fleeting. Another recapping of repetition perfected. Out of the woods into the fire. To recognize one suffers from addiction is to be completely and utterly blindsided, caught off kilter. One center spiraling off into streets, waking whole neighborhoods. It is to understand the scope of self, even if that scope is blurry and seems untrue. And my friends, it isn't a betrayal to give in to those daemons when they are babes, but it is unbecoming to understand them and change nothing. 3 days of rain proceeded. Black top curved, a galaxy of raindrops. Must have been 4 a.m. Car tires slick, sliding down inner loop. Don't remember direct thoughts, only emotion, raw, like an egg. Jubilation. Sparks flying around brain molecules, colliding and caressing, pinning each other, then spiraling off to the edges, greeting dark. Felt foot slip further forward, watching speedometer hand fly up in dramatic speed, then spinning, squealing, stopping, silence. No sights, no sounds. Awful quiet. My car faced sideways, having spun 180 degrees, shuddering, withholding my awe. I was alive, still drunk, still stupefied, in a moment of pure mysticism. But did this parable of fear and discomfort of the darkest kind lead me to learn? You could simply ask the handcuffs around my wrists, no more than 30 days later.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. So I'm going to ask you some questions about that set.
Yeah.
And I think it would be good to sort of preface this by saying that you and I came together for an interview. That's how we met.
Right.
Back in the fall. So we came together for an interview of a collection of poems you published with your uncle called These Streets.
Yeah.
You wrote a series of poems in Rochester. He wrote a series of poems in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a collaborative effort. And so I interviewed you about that collection of poems for Floated magazine.
Right.
And so sort of in the spirit of our first time collaborating, we thought it would be a fun idea to sort of ask each other questions about our writing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So there's so much to that series that you just read. Mm-hmm. So I think my first question, the first thing that really stood out to me was your structure of each poem. So if you could talk to me a little bit about those quoted phrases, kind of where those came from, and then how the first line of the poem is bold, large, really grabs the eye. So if you could just talk a little bit about how you structured your poems.
So I think with like the quoted kind of parts of the poems, I feel like that comes a lot from reading like older poets, and there might be a line where it says something in a poem. It's always funny to me when a character speaks, because I'm like, that's not, no one talks like that. It's just a part of the poem. You know, he said, and then it's like a really poetic thing that the poet is putting in there. So I kind of wanted to harken back to some of that stuff where it makes you feel like you're reading something that maybe is quoted from like a book or another author, but it's really just kind of like being sneaky and just and also being self-involved enough to be like, yeah, this sounds classic, doesn't it? I'm just gonna sneak this in here. But I wanted to just pull back from those kind of like ideas and do that. And then with the bolded top of the first line, I always really love in storybooks, old books, where they would have like the first letter or something would be gigantic on the page, and then the rest of the words would kind of like follow after it. So I just thought that would be kind of cool to like start every single poem with something really bold and like catch your attention just for this set in particular too. So
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it was a great choice. I think it really does capture the reader's attention. It sort of makes the reader ask questions even before reading the poem.
Right. Yeah, you're like, what is that? Why is he yelling at me?
Like, what's going on here? So
Yeah.
I think that was really clever, and it really, I think, captures the reader's attention, makes you think even before you start reading. So I thought that was really great, and I wanted to make sure to ask you about your structure.
Yeah.
So my next question has a little bit more to do with the voice and the tone. So I've read your series of poems called These Streets, and now I'm reading these, and there's a bit of a different tone, a bit of a different voice that really stood out to me. So this set of poems here feels really raw, really intense, really vulnerable too.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a confessional going on, I think, in some of them.
Yeah.
And sort of, yeah,
sure.
Definitely taking some ownership, experiencing some growth, some confessing. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about your voice and your tone, and kind of what prompted this series, what prompted your willingness to share these themes with your readers.
Well, 2 years ago, I got a DWAI, and that was like one of the most eye-opening experiences I've ever been through in my entire life. And I feel like, I guess like a good example is one of the things you have to do with your DWI is you have to go and sit in a room full of other people who also have DWIs, and you have to do a victim impact panel. If anyone listening doesn't know what that is, they bring people who have been affected by drunk driving in some way, shape, or form, and then they just talk to you, and you don't have a phone, you don't have anything to write, there's no distracting, you're just there, and you feel the way that you should. You feel terrible, you feel like an idiot, and you feel really embarrassed. But the scary thing is that you're in a room full of people, like a whole room, like an auditorium full of people who also have DWIs, and you're like, this is scary that this many people are also in here for the same thing that I am. So I think what I realize is that if I chose to speak about it, I think other people who may have run in with the law or had some kind of stupid thing that they've done in the past and done something like that, maybe they would see that, well, you could either take it one way, it could be like a cautionary tale, or if you've experienced it, then it's to connect to people who maybe have also experienced it. And like, yeah, you feel stupid and you feel kind of like an idiot, but it makes you question, like, why did that happen? What led up to that point in your life? So I think this poetry series, and especially the book that I'm working on, is kind of like a deep dive into how do we end up in certain situations, and like, why are we there, and what are we supposed to learn from it, instead of just having it happen to you and not doing anything about it. That's what the last poem is about, is sure. that I was drunk driving months before I got my DWI and almost died from it, and then it didn't stop me. And then I got a DWI, and it's like, well, yeah, dumbass. Like, of course that happened, you know what I mean? So it's really honest, and it's really kind of like stripped away from like a lot of the stuff in These Streets is really like big and lofty, and like this is just like straight, very
yes.
confession.
Yeah, definitely. I noticed a big shift sort of in your message and in your tone and in your voice. So I wanted to make sure to talk to you about that, because this, I think this set is really brave, and I really commend you for just
thanks.
leaning into it and kind of taking that.
I don't know about that, but
yeah, no, really, I think it is. I think to share this with a readership is really brave, so I commend you for doing that.
Thanks.
And the last thing I wanted to talk to you about was your imagery in this set. It's very sensory. I feel like it's very tactile. So in the first poem, we've got caring only for the cork, placing it upon my back, climbing up the sides, slipping, falling. It feels super tactile. Like you feel like you're sort of inside or outside of the bottle, climbing it, feeling it. And then later on in the set, we have sparks flying around brain molecules, colliding and caressing, pinning each other. So there's a lot of really sensory imagery I feel like you evoked in this set. And I would love to just hear you talk a little bit more about that.
I think like a lot of the imagery and stuff is so raw and very sensory because I think that's kind of how you feel when you're hungover. You know, like the writing was supposed to make you feel supposed to make you feel a little bit kind of dizzied by the fact of like just reading this stuff like in succession, kind of how you feel when you're drunk, like you're just like kind of like in and out of it. I don't know what's going on. And then like the next morning you're like, what did I do? Oh my God, I did all that, you know? So I think a lot of thinking about all that stuff and thinking back on it, because I've been sober for over 3 months now. So yeah,
congratulations.
So, thanks. But writing all this stuff, it is a little bit of like raking myself over the coals a little bit, but there's a time in my life that I'm not the most proud of, but I think by writing about it, you kind of can own, something a little bit more than just feeling bad about something, because that's only going to hurt yourself in the end. So I think, I chose a lot of more gritty kind of like imagery and words and stuff to grab you a little bit more, because it's a very serious topic that I'm talking about, but also just wanted to bring like a realness to it, because that's the way that I felt, that's all it is.
So I can share my set if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's your turn. Let's go.
Yeah. So I'll just give a quick overview of this set. So back in the summer and the fall and even the winter, before the pandemic hit and we all were quarantined, I was going to the Spirit Room bar on State Street every Tuesday night for live jazz sessions. So I made it a point to try to go almost every Tuesday, or as many as I could, and bring my journal and just do some writing. And for a while, I was just sort of a fly on the wall, just listening and writing. And then, of course, over time, it's a small bar, so you get to know everyone there.
Right.
I've become good friends with the jazz musicians and the bartenders and the people who go regularly to watch that set. So This series came out of my experience going there and just listening to their talent and the emotion that they put into their music. And I think it's a good time to put these out into the world, because I think we're all missing that connection. I think we're missing the experience of live music and interacting with live music viscerally. So I know that I'm really longing for that, and I'm sure other people are as well.
Right.
So I thought this would be a good time to put this series out.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is the Spirit Room Jazz Sessions.
Yeah.
So the first one is called Horn Study. Out through the horn of the trumpet comes the absolution of pain, dancing with abandon, conception of new life, and ideas, the ideas. Next verse is the daily setback of prejudice, unexpected loss, failure to meet expectations of self and others. And finally, free-falling chromaticism, rhythmic bliss, and a presence of mind without thought. The next one is called Gray Quartet, which is the name of the house band that plays every Tuesday. I want to hear, no, I want to be in the music, bouncing off the snare, eating the notes, climbing the piano's hammers, until I fly off, up, down, between the treble and the bass, and hang forever in the air with the last note. The next poem is called In the Woodshed with Charlie. A kind of meditation, this isolated plight towards perfection, no stronger calling than this. He sits to begin his nightly pilgrimage, eyes dark as pitch and hollow, a gateway to the frenetic thought that lies within. But right now he is at peace, every muscle relaxed, glance lowers until his eyes are closed. He lifts his instrument and with a measured breath torches his first note, sends it soaring, flying stark into the night sky. And the last poem in the set is called Bob. Troubled even before conception, parents came over on the boats, papers got lost, no routes to trace. Then, industrial slums, instead of gold-paved roads and endless opportunity, muggings instead of handshakes, shaped the worldview of the child who skipped childhood, who shows up in handcuffs to bury his father, who discovers jazz and is saved by its dissonance, but also by its dope, who goes on to father 7 of his own, adopt 1 more after he's crashed on the floor, who runs away to the other side of the world when life and its pressures feel insurmountable, who dies too young before his grandkids can know him, let alone his own children, and whom I hear and feel every time the jazz combo starts in.
My first question was just going to ask how prevalent jazz has been, or how important it's been to your life. If it's been something like before the Spirit Room, or was it just something that getting to see, because honestly, like a lot of people who aren't into jazz, when they go and see it live, they're like, oh yeah, I get it. You know.
Sure. I mean? Yeah, it is such a visceral experience, I think, and seeing it live is paramount, I think, to understanding it and enjoying it. So it's kind of interesting, that last poem in the set, Bob, that's about my grandfather, who died when I was, I think, 4 or 5, so I never really got to know him, but he was a professor of jazz. So he was a professor of jazz trumpet, and he's played with Glenn Miller, Louis Armstrong, Charlie Parker. So he was pretty good in his day, but he passed away so young that I never really had a chance to know him. And even my father didn't get to know him so well because he was part of such a big family. It was kind of a distant connection to him. So I think growing up in my family, I was exposed to jazz sort of as a means to get to know my grandfather and understand him. I never had a chance to know him. So we had some jazz around the house growing up, but it was more kind of vocal melodic jazz, like Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, big band swing sort of jazz. That's what I grew up to. And then I think later on my own, maybe high school, college, I just sort of took a deep dive into bebop and hard bop and just spiraled down the rabbit hole from there.
The cool jazz era.
Yeah, sure. Cool jazz. Yeah, Bill Evans for sure. So I think part of it was just growing up in a family, with this jazz trumpeter patriarch who died so young that no one really got to know him. And it was just kind of this sort of way to understand him and have a connection to him. I think that's what really started it. And then later on my own, as I became an adult, I did more exploration of it.
I was going to say, it was interesting hearing about somebody in your own family. So it's almost like you had your own lore or some kind of shrouded figure. And I was curious if the lore of jazz kind of drew you in even more, being a writer and kind of like hearing all these old stories like John Coltrane playing for like hours and hours on end and all these, crazy things.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of sort of mysticism with the jazz greats and jazz lore. I think it's kind of this dark, nebulous scene when you sort of dive back to 1940s and 1950s jazz. It was a little bit seedy.
For sure.
And imperfect. So yeah, definitely. I think there's some lore that's compelling there. The poem that I wrote, In the Woodshed with Charlie, that's kind of my fictionalized concept of what it would be like to sit in on a late night practice session with Charlie Parker. So the term woodshedding, meaning just practicing runs endlessly. So I kind of wanted to just envision what a practice session with him would be like. And I think there is a lot of mysticism to that. And sort of these darker images and sort of just nebulous, unknown themes there. So yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the jazz greats kind of had to step into this larger than life role. And they weren't really ready for that. I mean, they were just, they were talented musicians, but I think they sort of took on these personas that maybe they didn't want. And I think it led a lot of them to drug use and different ways of dealing with that. So yeah, I think definitely, I think the lore and all of that is very compelling.
And I was just going to ask, my last one was, do you think writers can exist without music and vice versa? Or are they just too intertwined that, I mean, even writers being musicians, writing songs and stuff like that, I think traditional writing of poetry or writing like a novel or something is a little bit different, but just curious what you think on that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that art is so multimodal, and I think that art is a response to your situation. So like, for example, this set was a response to me listening to these jazz musicians. And so I think art is inherently interwoven. I think a lot of it is a response or a reaction to other forms of art that you witness. Yeah, I think absolutely music is connected to writing as it is to visual art and film, and all the aesthetics I think work together.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely, I think it'd be hard pressed to find writing that isn't influenced in some way by music, and vice versa. I think art really weaves itself together beautifully in that way. And I think people can be inspired or influenced by so many different forms of art.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking me to be a part of this.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad we were able to get together again. It was really fun to connect the first time for the Floated interview. And so it was fun to come back together and just share some stuff that we've been working on more recently. Hopefully the next time we collaborate, it'll be in person.
We'll see. Hopefully. All right.
Thanks so much, Jordan.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.